it's an alchemical process in that I this is not my personal quotation, but actually this is a very good tip that I add on. It's another writer said it, so it's not my original thought, but this writer said fiction, like novels, they don't come from the head or the heart, right? They come from the gut. And I really love that, because I think like actually, if you think about it, if you have an idea for a novel and it's too cerebral, it's too abstract. You say, I want to write about like climate change and prejudice, for example, right? It's too cerebral and it's too unwieldy. And if you're writing too much from the heart, if you're writing about, say, like, oh, I had a breakup, or like, whatever, I had this person tell me off in the street yesterday, I'm really angry, I'm gonna channel that into fiction. It's because it's too close to the kind of skin of your feelings, and your writing brain will insist that's not how it happens, so you won't be able to invent anything, right? So you'll be kind of constrained by the truth of the matter. You're too close to it. So when I say that person says the best fiction comes from the gut, it's because like you need enough narrative distance between you and whatever source of trauma or pain or pleasure that you're writing from, and then you can have that detachment and that instinct of what exactly is memorable about it, and what is interesting about it, and more interestingly, what your gut is telling you in terms of how you can invent and push things in unexpected directions, so that the reader feels what you feel. Because to me, it's all about communicating with the reader and really like empathizing. So I think it's really important for me. All my characters are kind of horrible and like miserable miserable people, but my whole aim is really just to make the reader feel for them. And I think if they've done that, then I feel like I've succeeded.
I think that's excellent. Like, I feel that way. Like, reading your characters, they're complex, they're miserable in their lives mostly, but you absolutely love reading about them. So I was afraid this would be a very commonly asked question, because I often see authors responding to writing tips for young authors or whatever, all of that. These have to be the most practical ones I've heard ever.
Thank you.
So, yeah, actually, you were right. I still have one question left about the book itself. Sue, I think she's the main character. Do you feel like that? Yeah, she is. For me, she would be like the main one. So Sue, she starts out with this really complicated life. It's messy, it's dingy, it's quite mean. And then at the very end, we don't see her grow up. We just go from school Sue straight off to Sue being married, has a kid, and her life is extremely normal. I mean, while you're reading the book, you expect her to be in shambles by the time she's 30. Uh, so it was such a shock at the end for me to see that she's just leading a normal life. And my expectation of her being a mess and just scraping through life that doesn't happen. So like, what happened? Talk me through what was going on. I loved it. It really showed me how resilient life is, and you think your life is a mess when you're a teenager, but it works out.
I think I just always wanted a happy ending for her. I didn't really like plan the ending, but it just felt right to me. I've gotten a variety of responses. I mean, I know quite a lot of people really like the ending, but I also got some responses from some friends where they were like, "Oh, huh." Like that they kind of wanted a bit more, or they wanted them to meet or something like that. But I personally really like endings like that are like I think you get them in film a lot of the time. Like I can't think of like which films off the top of my head, but like you can get it a lot more in cinema where it'll end with like a windscreen wiper or something on a rainy day, and then it just ends. Like you're kind of like, oh. So I kind of wanted to mimic that sort of cinematic, like like a jump cut, because the whole for a novel about film, so it's almost like a flash forward, and then it kind of ends like just when it's exciting, like how I think the best short stories and more like short stories and novels, they raise more questions than they necessarily resolve things. But yeah, I wanted her to do okay, because I think she spends the whole book like really like, you know, getting a hard time. You know, she's
Yeah.
starving herself. She's, you know, she's got no friends. You know, her friend dumps her. It's horrible. Poor
I
Sue.
think the phrase that I came up with is you wrote a reverse French movie ending. Because French movie endings are a twist in the worst way possible, but you wrote the twist and it was good and it ended happily when you didn't expect it to. So that was good. I'm happy and I'm also confused. And I was like, this is very realistic. Life doesn't turn out to be the worst that always does. Okay, is there a second book? I feel like you've already a little bit answered that, but is it there?
Yeah,
Is it similar? Is it very different?
it's very different. I think it's like yeah, it's called Take Care. It's very different to Punty. Yeah,
What?
I've
All
kind
the
of
best.
mostly finished it. Yeah. Yeah.
All the best with that. I mean, I'm really looking forward to reading more from you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so um, I think I'd love to ask this as somebody, since you're a creative writing professor, you're also a writer yourself. Do you engage in smaller writing exercises for yourself, or is your writing style just like it's a big passion project where you have a story in mind and you just really want it in front of you on paper?
I think it's a mixture of both. Like generally when I like start on a novel, like I'm mostly very focused on it, but I have been like trying to experiment a bit more recently and like using prompts and creative constraints and stuff like that, because I think it's very important to like push yourself, and like prompts and small craft exercises are really helpful for doing that. Like even if the result is really embarrassing, even just that act of like pushing yourself, like I think opens up new possibilities and ensures that you don't just always write in the same way.
Yeah. So, I think just to talk a little bit more about writing, actually literature that's coming out of Singapore and India, because we touched on this a little bit, but I think there's such a conscious move away in the past 10 or 20 years from even the readers just wanting to move away from Western literature more, dive more into contemporary literature that young people or people their age, people that share their culture are writing.
Mhm.
I think the space has changed so much. Like in India, I think I don't know what people outside are reading, but their idea of what Indian writing I feel is so different. I feel like there's a lot of poverty porn circulating. There's a lot of
Yeah.
it's just it's a very different idea from what our lived reality every day is. So
Yeah.
yeah, we could just talk a little bit about that. What's Singapore like, what Indian writing's like, how Western literature also is changing to keep up with that.
Yeah. I think like I mean I think Indian literature has always been held in pretty high esteem for like, you know, several generations by now. I think there's a very rich contemporary canon. Obviously we look toward like kind of more traditionally, you know, they're kind of these like heavyweights of literature. But I think more recently you have writers like Avni Doshi, for example, or the Burnt Sugar, which I think is just such a terrific and experimental novel, um, and really really beautiful. And as you said, like, you know, it depicts um, life, you know, Indian life in a way that is not cliched. Um, and I think, as you said, there's a much more of an appetite for that, you know, that kind of leaning away from cliche. Another really excellent novel, I think, that by an Indian American writer, Jade Sharma, Problems. I loved that book. I thought it was funny and sad, and then it was really shocking. So yeah, I think there's a whole like wave of writers that are kind of pushing the boundaries of cultural perception. But I think that there's another argument to be made where it's annoying that if you're not white, there's that kind of burden of cultural explanation that's put on you, like, you know, that you have to kind of like package or commodify your experience in a way that is like palatable to, like, you know, the universal, or like what is the idea of the universal. I think I read a quote by, I think it might have been Claudia Rankin, and she was saying that, like, you know, the idea of the universal really just means like, you know, white, like something that is like, when they say something's not universal enough, they mean it's not white enough. Like, you know, it's not kind of flattened for a particular gaze. Like, you know, a story is universal, and they say it's not universal. Like there's too much specificity. So it's like, you know, there's so many demands placed on writers, and on one hand to give you a lot of cultural, emotional specificity, but on the other hand, like, that doesn't account for the fact that, particularly if you know, Anglophone writers, you know, that, you know, come from countries with the other languages that are speaking and involved, we're also talking about oral storytelling traditions or mythical structures of storytelling, which don't really follow, you know, the conventional 3 act structure. They don't really follow Aristotle all the time. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I'm thinking of like, you know, 1001 Nights, or like, you know, like some like old like Chinese myths, or you know, things like that. Like, you know, it's just like the archetypal idea of myth or story. When people think of that, they think of Aristotle, right?
Yeah.
So if a book doesn't conform to that, then you have the gatekeepers like saying, like, you know, this is not good enough. But like,
Yeah.
you know, on what value system are we making that assessment, right? And I think there are a lot of like internalized and unacknowledged biases that we as readers have, and that's natural. I'm not saying, like, I'm not like virtue signaling and saying there's such a thing as a perfect reader, but I think we're coming to a time right now where we're evaluating these choices, and, you know, there are things like sensitivity readers, and, you know, things like, you know, the crowd of the internet basically, you know, where you know, writers are held a lot more accountable to sort of like doing the work, and I think that's a good thing. But on the other hand, you know, there are people who might say it's too censorious. So I don't know. I don't have any answers for that.
I think we, at least in India, there's still like it's so prevalent that Indian writing is going to maybe explain with a comma or a bracket what we're talking about. Like a term is either explained, the Hindi is then, you know, added with a English explanation, or there's a glossary of extremely basic terms that you could just Google and figure it out for yourself. And I feel like we're in that flux period where you know, some writers are very conscious of it, and they're saying, no way I'm going to do this, and feel free to Google the terms, because we've been doing that for Western literature for forever. And
Yeah.
it's time you start putting in a little bit of work while you're reading. And there are others who are still sort of keeping in with that, italicizing Hindi words. So it's like, you know, we're going through that little change, and hopefully it just goes away at some point of time, because it bugs me. Like it's like a fairly common Indian dish. There's no need to italicize this word.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, but I'm also enjoying this period of flux. No, it's like, let's see where this goes. Let's see where
Yeah,
it takes, like Indian writing.
definitely.
So yeah, should we move into question and answers?
Yeah, sure.
Meenal?
Yeah, yes, Ranjani, there's if
Yeah.
anyone has a question. Meanwhile, there's a question from Vijay Balan.
Well, I'll take over from here. There's a question from Vijay Balan, who's also one of our authors, and he's watching this event from the US. Congratulations, Sharlene. To what extent has Singapore's multicultural history and environment, that is Chinese, Malay, Indian, British, influenced your writing?
Ooh, that's a great question. Thank you for that. Well, you know, massively, in the sense that you know, the writer is a product of their environment, and Singapore being multicultural, multilingual, kind of not really having that much of a sort of dominant history or like, a very long lineage. It's a very young country, a very young nation, that I think when I was growing up was shaped a lot by, public policy and like, national education messages that you'd see around there. That's, it kind of plays a role in how I've come to shape my memory and shape my early impressions. Definitely, I think I was always aware of this multiculturalism and the idea that there wasn't one clear strand of history, like, like it wasn't so simple as that. Like, there's a history of like colonialism and, a history with Malaysia and, being a country comprised of migrants. So that's always played a part, I think, like in how I formed just impressions of the world.
I think there's this really interesting, just this one line that caught my attention, again, about like italicizing local words and stuff. It says, even the pranta was more expensive here. And I was like, wait, what's that? I'm not understanding this word. And I look it up and it's the same as a paratha. And I was like, I forget how much of like a common culture Southeast Asia shares. So that was fun. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
So, yeah, do we have any more questions? We can wait a couple minutes. And until then, you can tell us a little bit about Singapore. How is it being back home? What's new there?
Everything and nothing. I mean, it's raining very very violently. So this morning it was like a proper like lovely thunderstorm. It's very nice to kind of like sleep in. And yeah, I've just been eating a lot. In Singapore, it's like great food culture. I went to a nursery today to look at some plants. I'm picking up some plant things. Oh no, actually, sorry. Me and my dad were picking up some flowers for my mom because it's her birthday tomorrow. So
oh my God, it's my mom's birthday tomorrow.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Scorpio mom. Happy birthday to your mom.
Happy birthday to your mom.
So yeah, we picked up some flowers. Like it was very sweet. My dad picked the main flowers, and then my job was to pick like complementary colors, whatever. But the new thing that I've kind of perceived from Singapore is that there's a huge boom right now in plant influencer culture. So it seems like these garden centers are like booming. Like when we went there, like my dad couldn't even get a parking space for a bit. It was like so crowded. I know. And then when we went in and there was one of the plants that was selling for $20,000. I'm just like, who's got the money to buy a plant for $20,000?
Oh my goodness. The most incongruous thing that I've seen is like a lot of my friends now just know plant names. Yeah. And they're like, oh, this needs this much water, and I'm like, wait, where did I miss this class? How do I not know this? So it's all Instagram. It's making everybody into plant parents.
And like I think it's also like, well, my mother said this earlier. She said that it's a fad right now because of lockdown. So like even though it's lockdown, everyone was home a lot.
Mm-hmm.
One question. Oh, it's Urvi asking the question. Urvi, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hi, Sharlene. Hi, Shubhanjani. This has been a fantastic session to listen into. Sharlene, I have a very quick question. Can you tell us a little bit about writing for media, for the TV, for how is it different from writing a novel or a book? How does it differ for you?
Well, I'm not writing for TV. I'm not involved in the script writing process at all. I've written the script before, but like it's only been one script. But I can answer your question in terms of writing in different modes, if you like. So like I do quite a lot of nonfiction stuff. Like if I get commissioned to write something or a review, and it's a completely different hat that you wear. I think for me, I find every other kind of writing like easier than fiction. Like, because it's kind of like less pressure involved, like I write a journal every day, most days. So like I actually can write very quickly, like if I don't like freak myself out. But when it comes to fiction, because it's so important to me, I just freak myself out, and I'm incredibly slow. Like I kind of like I can like just write like sometimes 70 words in a day. Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like an achievement. I start a new blog every year and I abandon it within a
Oh.
month. And then I shamefully delete it. I was like, I hope nobody in the world sees this. And then just go back to feeling guilty about not writing anything at all. Okay. I think we.
No, I have a question. When you're researching for writing fiction, vis-a-vis researching for doing long form writing for nonfiction, even if it's just an essay you're writing for one of the magazines or papers, the bent of mind as far as different kinds of research is also different for you, or is it more taxing? Is it something that makes you think differently, create differently?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I find Google Docs really, really helpful because with Google Docs, you can save offline, and you can also, if you can put it on your phone as an app, and then you can add to the document whenever, and it gets saved on the cloud, like across all your devices. So like I find that incredibly generative. Like when I'm first setting out to do a piece of work, most of the time when it's nonfiction, or even when it's fiction sometimes, but I'm not really a very good researcher. Like when it comes to fiction or a novel, like I generally prefer to like write my way into it, even if it is quite research heavy. Sometimes I get bogged down by research. I like to download PDFs and like keep them on my desktop and punish myself forever, like never opening it. And then finally I open it and read it. I copy paste the most essential bits of it into Scrivener, which is the writing software, so that I have a kind of database of all the useful things that I need. And I did that for my PhD as well as for my 2 novels. So yeah.
Right. Now, since you're so steeped in the art of writing fiction, the question that's doing the rounds in the publishing industry, at least here, is everyone's asking whether the form of the novel is going to be impacted because of the pandemic.
Oh, in what sense?
Yeah, it seemed to be a rather stretched question, but I was asked this in an interview 2 days back. And I was pretty flummoxed by that question. So since you're so steeped, and I don't write fiction, I'm a nonfiction writer. So I was wondering if you had a different take on it, or is it going to affect the form of the novel thematically,
Yes.
or experimenting in voices?
Yeah, no, I can answer that. Meta, just watch the space. In about 2 years, we're going to be absolutely inundated with really, really boring novels about the pandemic. There'll be a chick flick book called chick lit book called The Lockdown, about these two neighbors that like hook up with lockdown. There'll be a speculative pandemic fiction about someone that becomes a houseplant. There will be a kind of dystopian lockdown novel. Like there'll be tons of novels about this lockdown. So yeah, that's how it's affected like production.
I was just reading a 2020 release or a 2021 release about this whole thing, like a pandemic, and then the children are affected and they're hallucinating. And I was like, I don't know if you wrote this in like 2018, 2019, and you just released it at the right time, but this is eerie to read right now when we're not even out of the pandemic.
I know it's not over. There's a novel called Severance by Lingma that I really recommend if you want to read about. It's incredible. It came out in 2019 or 2018, and it's so prescient. She made it all up, but it's about a China-originated virus that infects the whole world, and well, in this case, makes people into zombies. But like everything about like she narrates about the virus first coming out, the news cycle, people not believing it, people staying indoors. It's crazy. It's a really good novel.
These people were on to something.
I think there's one more question.
There are 2 more.
Oh, there are 2. All right. Sorry. There's one more that says, would you suggest any thriller fiction based in Singapore which you like particularly?
Honestly, I don't really read thrillers. So I can't really, I'm trying to think of something in that genre, like a mystery. Off the top of my head, no, I can't think of any thrillers. Sorry.
Oh, well. I think the next question is also by one of our authors only, Sunita Pansal. What do you feel is easier, writing short stories or writing a novel?
Neither. I think I find writing a novel is more my form. Like I like the bagginess of a novel, and I like how a novel lets you sort of like wade around in a world and really familiarize yourself with your character. Whereas I think that a good way of looking at short story is that it always should begin as if a short story should begin as if there's been a whole novel before it. You know, it's really challenging in that sense that it's a lot more technically demanding. Like you can't waste any space with a short story. So yeah, I find novels easier, actually.
Right. Do you think we'll have any more questions, or should we just?
I think we're okay. Yeah, I don't see anything else coming in.
But thank you so much, Sharlene and Shivranjani, for a very interesting session. I've got messages on my WhatsApp already appreciating how articulate and yeah, there you go. You get another comment saying great session. So that says it all for this evening. For this episode of Universe Rights presented by Sri Cement in association with Prabhaketan Foundation, I thank all the people who joined us as audience this evening for having taken out time. But most of all, a huge thank you to you, Sharlene. This was simply brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you.